All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. It is 3:05, and or I guess it's a minute or two after that. So, welcome. Sure. Yeah. Thank you. All right, so welcome to Making Connections with Flight Simulation. Couple of introductions first. I'm Paul Duty. I'm the Chief Flight Instructor at Gleim Aviation. I'm also the Aviation Product Manager at Gleim. I'm a flight instructor, a multi-engine instructor, advanced ground instructor, single-engine, multi-engine instrument, and a remote pilot. I'm here with Callie.
Hi, I'm Callie Wilkes. I'm a STEM coordinator at Gleim Aviation, private pilot, and I got my license when I was in high school, so I'll tell you about that a little bit later.
Good deal, thank you. So just a little bit about Gleim. Who here is, let me learn a little bit about you. By show of hands, who here is already a pilot? Wow, so about 75% of the room. Who here is a flight instructor? Anybody? Nobody here is a flight instructor? Anybody, any ground instructors? Anybody here? We got one. Any educators? Any teachers here? A couple of them? All right. Good deal. So a little bit about Gleim. Did anybody here use the red books when you got your licenses? Good deal. So a few of you. So Gleim is often known as the red books. We've been training aviators since 1980. A couple things about Gleim. We work with the FAA on quite a few industry firsts. So like the flight instructor refresher courses. Every flight instructor every 2 years has to renew their certificates. There's a number of different ways to do that. One way is online. We did the very first FAA approved flight instructor refresher course. We did the first inspection authorization refresher course online. So aircraft mechanics and the inspectors have to renew their licenses as well. Flight simulation, we've been involved with that since 2010. Forgot to mention online ground school. So we have the world's only FAA approved online ground school. So there's lots of ground schools out there in terms of ones that have standing FAA approvals. We do that. So flight simulation we've been involved with since 2010. We started out with a sport pilot training course that worked with a couple of different manufacturers up in the Northeast, and that has expanded out to private pilot training. And then in the last 2 years, it's expanded now to hardware solutions called the Gleim Virtual Cockpit. We'll talk a little bit more about the X-Plane flight training course, but we're really here to talk about how you guys can make connections, guys and gals can make connections in your communities with aviation. But why do you want to do that? Because aviation is flying high. This is a great time to be involved with aviation. So roughly, here's a stat for you might not know, roughly 20 to 25% of all pilots worldwide have trained in the United States. 80% of all pilot certificates issued in the United States come right here from Florida. So as we're trying to figure out different locations to do different activities, or if you're opening up a flight school, or if you want to get involved with flight training in any way, you're here. You're right in the middle of it. The FAA is broken down into different geographic regions, as you can see on a map here. But in the southern region, our Orlando district office is probably the busiest office of all of them. So there is a huge amount of flight training that takes place right here in Central Florida. 18% increase in student pilot certificates were issued. That's from 2017 to 2018, so 18% increase. What is really interesting about that is that shows that, yeah, there are more people getting into aviation, but what are existing pilots doing? Well, they are moving up. There's been a 30% increase in ATP, which is an airline transport pilot. So the pilots who are flying for hire, the pilots who are flying for the airlines, there's 18% increase in students, but 30% more airline pilots. How about remote pilots? Anybody in here a drone pilot? Fly drones at all? You have your Part 107 remote pilot certificates? So that program, that certificate started August of 2016. So in less than 3 years, this is as of June 1st, 130,551 remote pilots have been issued here in the United States. That is enormous. So let's talk a little bit about aviation opportunities. So Callie?
Thank you. So as a STEM coordinator, I'm really focused in that high school level and building the pipeline. And we're excited to see these growing trends, people becoming student pilots, moving up in aviation. And it's also good because there are a lot of careers out there that are hiring right now. The military is hiring. So the pilot outlook over the next 20 years, Boeing does a study every year. In the next 20 years, you can see there's a huge demand for commercial pilots, helicopter, business pilots, and also drone pilots. So here's just a few of the career options that you can go into within aviation. I'm a non-traditional aviation career. I work at Gleim. I'm not a pilot every day, even though I have my pilot's license. And if you want to become a commercial pilot or a maintenance technician, or just go into engineering and have that aerospace side to it as well, these are great career options. And obviously the military is looking for pilots, really a lot of pilots right now. So where are we going to fill these careers? The classroom is a great place to start. So here's just a look. It's not just the United States. It's a global demand. So here are the numbers where we need all these careers to be filled.
790,000 pilots. Did you see that? Go back one. 790,000 pilots are needed in the next 20 years.
In the next 20 years,
worldwide.
so by 2020.
So, and it's not just pilots. I mean, let's face it, we fly the planes, mechanics have to fix the planes that we fly. So 754,000 maintenance technicians are needed. So
yeah.
Pretty much any career in aviation right now, this is huge.
And there's a beautiful thing about these career options. You don't have to have a college degree to become a pilot or become a technician. And the salaries that you get by going into these fields can be great. I'll touch on that in a second. The trends that we're seeing, high schools are really kind of taking on this torch. So they're trying to build programs to train new pilots, whether it be drone pilots or private pilots, and then telling them about these opportunities and how to continue to get into the career. And STEM occupations as a whole is growing. So if you want to take that engineering route and still go to college and do a traditional path, you're still going to benefit by having this background. So here's a picture of some of the students that are using our products in the classroom at the high school level. And it's a great way that STEM is kind of the buzzword right now. So,
let me ask you a question. Does anybody here not know what STEM is?
Okay. Science, technology, engineering, and math. The concept is that these are not separate subjects, but they are combined into one. So you're integrating these subjects together so that you're better gaining the knowledge and understanding the concepts. Aviation is perfect for that, which is why STEM and aviation go perfectly together hand in hand. You are learning about math, learning about science, figuring these calculations on the fly, you're learning physics. These are all the things that you're doing when you're flying an airplane. So, as I just mentioned, aviation augments other subjects. So if you're a science teacher, you can use aviation. You don't have to have a full-blown aviation training course, but you can use aviation concepts in the classroom to help the students understand what you're teaching them. Same with physics and advanced math.
This picture, before we go to the next slide, this picture on the bottom right is really interesting. So these are students that are building a wind tunnel in their classroom. So they're not just flying simulators, they're not just learning the ground school part of it. They're actually doing real hands-on activities. So building the wind tunnels, building their own testing equipment. So you see NASA engineers that have what we would think is maybe unlimited budgets or millions and millions of dollars they're spending on engineering, design, and research. Well, you put groups of students together in high school settings, and the solutions that they're coming up with is just absolutely mind-blowing. So I mean, the teachers are challenging these students with different ways, and they are solving real-world problems. Yeah. Things into the future of aviation, things like electric flight, noise, more efficient ways to navigate point to point. Some of these solutions are coming straight out of your high schools.
Yeah. And they're learning teamwork, they're learning problem solving, they're learning critical thinking skills. These are things that need to be taught in the classroom. You may not be learning those in other ways. So, and like I mentioned before, these are career, they're preparing you for careers. So if you're in an aviation program or your teacher is incorporating aviation themes into their classroom, you can elaborate on how these students can go on, get a career, and provide an option that maybe isn't college. 70% of students right now are going to college, and that trend is going down because students want other options. They are hearing about this student debt, and they're hearing about all these problems about college, and they want options. So this is one great multiple options and career paths that they can take. So
how can we train more pilots? Well, let me pose a problem for you first. So before we talk about training more pilots, let's talk a little bit about pilot training and pilot currency and proficiency, since there are so many pilots in the room here. First off, currency does not equal proficiency. Let me say it again. Currency does not equal proficiency. What that means is, as a pilot, one of the most common questions that I'm asked is, oh, do you own your own airplane? Well, no, I don't. Luckily, I get paid to fly other people's planes. The second thing that I think I get asked more than anything else is, well, is there like a certain number of takeoffs and landings that you have to do to like keep your pilot's license? Well, the answer to that technically really is no, there isn't. There are some currency activities that you have to do, and you might be surprised at how low the legal current requirements actually are. So every 2 years, a pilot has to meet with a flight instructor and do what's called a flight review. It's an hour of ground training, it's an hour of flight training at a minimum. That's not very much to maintain your legal currency. Does that mean that you're actually proficient? No, no way. Not to mention that, let's say you do fly on a regular basis. The avionics systems that have come into light general aviation airplanes, the advancements in these avionics systems in the last few years has been astounding. So old school aviation, we'll say, with knobs and dials and VORs and NDBs, a lot of that stuff was all standardized. It didn't matter what system you looked at, the way you operated that system was exactly the same. Didn't matter what brand of avionics package you have. Well, now with some of these new glass cockpits and digital displays and touch screens and ADS-B and next gen, all this stuff that's coming into it, these systems are different. So being proficient on one system, it's going to be really hard to be proficient on another, even if you fly every day. So simulation is great for building proficiency in between your flights. So if you're not flying as often as maybe you'd like to, or should be, you can use simulation to build proficiency. Ooh, look, squirrel. What's that? Oh, it's a distraction. Of course, it's a flying squirrel. Why use simulators? Eliminate the distractions. When you're flying in an airplane, let's face it, the airplane's not always the best classroom. It's noisy, it's full of distractions, things happen that aren't expected. There's other airplanes, there's air traffic control, there's the flight instructor's talking to you and bugging you, and you're just trying to sit here and fly the airplane and punch a hole through the sky. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of distractions in the plane. It's not the best classroom. You can learn cockpit familiarization. We talked about navigation systems, so get familiar with navigation through simulation. Look around out here in the expo floor. Some of these systems that are out there that are emulating or replicating the real systems out there, it's amazing what I have seen in the past few years. Which, by the way, one thing I didn't mention, I got involved in simulation back in the mid-90s. I used to run a virtual airline, had a couple thousand pilots, went on to college and moved on from running a virtual airline, but that's what got me involved with aviation. I was a teenager in high school, and that inspiration to me, that inspired me to want to become a pilot. So that's what I did. I went to school for aviation. I've been flying now for about 19 years. But when I was learning to fly, I used the Microsoft Flight Sim. Who here remembers flying in and out of Meigs Field at Microsoft Flight Sim? Yeah. So I would go home every night and I would work on my lessons. I would look at my school's syllabus and I would work on these lessons, and then I'd go fly it in the simulator. So I did every single one of my ratings. Not here to brag or anything, but I did every single one of my FAA ratings at the minimum times. So the national average to get your private pilot is 75 hours. I did mine at 35, which is the minimum time in a FAA approved school. Instrument rating, I did that at 70 hours. Commercial, I did that at 190.0 hours. I attribute that to flight simulation.
And this is what teachers are providing to the current students. They're not all providing them time in an actual airplane. They're not able to, and the schools are often hesitant to. And so these types of stats are what the students today are able to do if they're in the classroom and getting sim time.
Yeah, flying's not cheap. So when you can save 40 hours, when you can save 100 hours on your commercial pilot training, that's tens of thousands of dollars that students can save. Learning maneuvers and procedures in the simulator, you can develop that muscle memory. You can develop those skills. Predictability, you know what the simulator is going to do. From an instructor standpoint, I love working with students in a simulator because I know exactly what that simulator is going to do and I can repeat it over and over. I can do the same maneuver. I've got a student who has trouble working on stalls. We can do the stall over and over again. I know exactly how it's going to perform and I can repeat that. And then that's going to help the student build confidence. They build that confidence by knowing what to expect when they get in the airplane. When they're flying the airplane, if they don't know what to expect, and remember you have all those distractions, you've got the squirrel, so watch out for them flying squirrels up there, they get frustrated and students drop out. It used to be that roughly 80% of students who started flight training would drop out. The stat has come down quite a bit, especially with this demand for new pilots. It's somewhere right now about 40 or 50%, but that's still really high. Roughly half of the people who start as a student pilot. So remember I said 18% student pilots have increased 18%? Think of it this way, probably half of them aren't going to finish. We got to build 790,000 pilots in the next 20 years. A controlled classroom environment is what simulation provides. The students who are doing simulation are able to get through their training much faster. One I think the most important reasons why simulation is important for training is what I call the elephant in the room. There's things that we talk about as flight instructors that when we teach our students, we cannot do in the airplane. There's things that just aren't safe to do in the real airplane. What does that include? Well, things like low altitude stalls and spins, severe icing encounters. We're here in Florida. What did I say? 80% of the pilots in the United States are training here in Florida. We don't have as much ice as somebody who's training, say, up north. So, but the pilots who are going to be flying for the other airlines, they're going to be flying all over the country, all over the world. They need to learn how these maneuvers and procedures and emergency operations, they need to become safe pilots. Actual engine failures and fires. I'd be really upset as a student pilot if my flight instructor really shut off the engine. We can simulate that in the airplane, but the engine's still running. So in the back of your mind, this is still safe. It's okay. I've got an instructor beside me. But how are you going to react when you're by yourself? You can replicate that in the simulator. High density altitude conditions, simulating hypoxia. These effects, like in X-plane. One of the common tech support requests that we get at Gleim, because we support the X-plane program as well, is, hey, I'm flying in this jet and all of a sudden my screen turned black. You know why? Because you didn't turn your oxygen system on. These simulators are smart enough to replicate those types of physiological effects like hypoxia. Instructor inputs required for the instructors in the room. The one thing that I always recommend is keep it realistic. Try not to put your students into a scenario that they absolutely cannot recover from. Remember, we're trying to keep them from getting frustrated, so keep it realistic. Here's a cost savings case study. I mentioned earlier it's 75 hours on average to get your private pilot license or certificate. Example, Cessna 172 that rents for $150 an hour, not even including the instructor, is going to cost $11,250. If you had an FAA-approved aviation training device, you can actually reduce the amount of time that is required for you to log in the airplane. You can log some time in the approved training device. It might be 5 hours in an advanced training device, but that doesn't mean that you can't log more time than that. You can just get credit for 5 hours toward a 35-hour program. So log as much time as you possibly can in a simulator. In this example here, I've got someone who logged 35 hours in an advanced training device at $75 an hour, $2,600. And then they flew the Cessna 172 for 30 hours. 30 plus 5 is 35 hours. That makes up their 35-hour requirement. $150 to that, $4,500. The total, $7,100. Look at the savings. Use the simulator as much as you can, and you just saved $4,075 or more when you're using things like desktop simulation. Desktop simulation, yeah, you might not be able to log that time, but you can absolutely train to proficiency and then demonstrate those skills in the airplane. Desktop simulation costs you whatever you're spending on your simulator setup. The more realistic your rig, the better, but let's face it, you're not spending 75 bucks an hour. Simulated instruction. So Gleim developed the X-Plane flight training course. We've had that available for a few years now. The private pilot course is used by thousands of pilots all over the country. It's used in schools all over the country. It's used by flight schools, it's used by high schools, used by individuals that are learning to fly from the comfort and safety of their own home. How does it work? It works by following one of our red books. This is the private pilot syllabus, which complies with Part 141, which is the FAA approval requirements. There's over 100 training videos, over 100 tutorial videos in the course. Pattern work, emergencies, diversions, weather, you name it. Anything from what we call the 4 fundamentals of flight, which are climbs, descents, turns, and straight and level, to the complicated maneuvers, ground reference maneuvers, navigation, working on certain avionics suites. So that's all covered in the course. The course actually has over 1,000 training checkpoints throughout it. These are different tasks that the student has to complete in order to graduate from the course. Teaches decision making and stick and rudder skills. When we first started doing this project years ago, there was some criticism that really came from the crowd that said, look, you can't use desktop simulation to train pilots to learn how to fly. You're going to cause all these students to have bad habits. The reality of it is, with a structured course, you not only prevent the bad habits, but you create safer pilots who are far more precise, who are able to fly by the numbers. And that's what has happened. And now look around, everybody else is playing catch up. This is still the only course of its kind in the world that is a flight training course for students to learn to fly at home that is actually based on a real world syllabus. It's not a game, this is a tool to learn how to fly. This is about creating safe pilots.
And this program also is what allows teachers to manage a classroom with multiple students in it, because if you do it at home by yourself, that's great, but a teacher cannot get 20 kids on a sim at one time and watch them all and tell them what to do. So this program helps them manage their classroom.
Right. So one thing that we're really excited to announce here at the Flight Sim Expo this year is that we are releasing a multi-user version of the course. It's not just for home users anymore. This is now integrated directly with school programs that the teachers and the educators are able to keep track of not just one course history, but multiple users. Unlimited users, unlimited instructors, unlimited students can log in from computers that are networked in a school's sim lab. What does the lesson look like? Well, here it is. You've got an objective, you've got completion standards. These match the objective and the completion standards that are here in the syllabus. So if I open up to Flight Lesson 1, which is the Introduction to Flight, we've got Lesson 1, the Introduction to Flight. We've got a normal takeoff and climb. We've got a level from a climb, cruise flight, Use of checklist. I'm going to skip a few here. Operation of systems, engine starting, taxiing. It's all covered in here. But you want the student to know what to expect. That's what those videos are for. So each lesson has a series of videos. They're short, they're bite-sized videos. Does anybody here like to sit through an hour-long lecture? No, that's why we're going to keep this to a half hour. But no, these videos are anywhere from like 1 to 5 minutes. They're short. You're not going to zone out. They're going to hold your attention, and you're able to move on. And then when you launch the lesson, so this is just an example screenshot of what one of the videos looks like inside the lesson. It's showing you like a block. You're not trying to guess, okay, the flight instructor wants me to imagine this rectangular course, or is it this road or that road, or what intersection am I looking at? We show you inside the course, so you know what to expect. You see this inside of a training video, and then when you go fly, you have real-time instruction and real-time feedback. The virtual instructor is talking to you, it's giving you real-time step-by-step instructions, and it's monitoring everything that is going on in the airplane. Remember, too high, too low, too fast, too slow, whatever it is, radios aren't set right, you're off course. If you're not within the parameters, or not within those tolerances, it's gonna give you an infraction. It's gonna not fix it for you, because in the real plane, you don't want the instructor to fix it for you. You have to learn how to do it yourself. The course is gonna give you that opportunity to fix it. Kind of hard to see it up here. There's some infraction text on the screen, but then at the end of each lesson, there's a post-flight report, what we call a flight profiler. This is just a snapshot of it, but it's going to show you where you flew, how high you flew, how fast you flew. It's going to show all the different maneuvers that you've completed. It's going to grade the maneuvers, so you know how much time you had with whatever phase of flight, how much time you spent with an infraction and what those types of infractions were. That way, you know what you need to improve on next time you fly the lesson. And then with that multi-user version, the teachers can see all of that data and they can help you out. And if you need some additional instruction, they know exactly where to customize your course.
Question.
Yes?
The multi-user, will the results be available online, or do we have to be at the computer?
So the question was, will the results be available online, or do you have to be at the computer? So the computers are networked. So some of that's going to depend. It's not online where you can just log in and say do it remotely, but the computers can be networked together. So as long as they're on the same network, the instructor can be on any of those machines and look at the results. Okay. So virtual, that question you asked was, right there's your answer. Network multi-user version, unlimited instructors and students. You can assign students to an instructor, monitor the student history and performance, and ultimately reduce the overall training time and cost. And as we talked about, reducing student frustration and abandonment, retaining more student pilots. I don't think anyone in here said that they were a flight school owner. If there are, raise your hand. Anybody? No? No flight school owners or operators, but if 80% of your, who in here owns a business? Anybody own a business in here? A few of you. If 80% of your clients drop out or quit or leave you before they actually finish whatever they're trying to buy, that's not good. You're not in the right business. With this product for flight schools, it keeps them coming back, keeps your students coming back. And again, safely demonstrate and evaluate ground and flight maneuvers, because that's really what this is all about, is creating safe pilots. So Callie, can you talk about how this course can be used throughout the community to engage students?
So I've talked a lot about schools. I think Paul illustrated that this can also be used in flight schools. The community is going to have to play a critical role in filling these pilot needs and getting the pipeline. So if you're in the aviation community in any way, pilots, most of the audience today is pilots, perfect audience, because if there's no one at the school that's championing this, they're not going to start this program. So someone has to have the idea and be able to support it, teach it, start an after-school club, or you have to start somewhere. And first you need to identify the decision maker. So it could be a principal, it could be the career tech education. That's a big area that's putting these programs. So there's a CTE admin, and maybe the school board or teacher. Start anywhere. If you know anyone at a school and you're a pilot and want to help, or some other person in the aviation community, we are the ones that are going to have to get this ball rolling. So find out what the school needs, if it's a course or what you're able to help with. And so identify your own role. You can champion to start the program, you can teach the program, you can be a guest speaker if your school already is doing this, or your CTE center is already doing this. You can take students up in your airplane. That is a huge need that needs to be filled, because there's already a lot of programs that we're working with. They have teachers, they have programs, but they don't know how to get the students in the air. And the students may love the sim, but they don't have that hook that's like really connecting it to, I could be a pilot, because they haven't been up off the ground, and pilots need to help with that. Or donate resources. If your school's got a program but not a sim, if you have the means, contact them and say, hey, I'd love to donate this to the school. Or it's at the airport and the students can come. Oh, and that photo is one of the classrooms that we work with in North Dakota. They have 6 sims in one classroom, about 20 students per semester. So that's a pretty good snapshot of kind of what these programs look like.
Where was this stuff when we were in high school?
Exactly. And really that's one of the things that I'm here to talk about as well, because I got my private pilot license while I was in high school, but no one ever told me about these careers. I didn't know about the opportunities. Not to say that that would have been the path I chose, but it would have been nice to know about that option. I went to college and took a different path, and it led me back to aviation because I love it. But we want the students to know, how do I become a pilot? It's not this elite thing that nobody can get into. We can get into it. A lot of you are pilots, you've done it. So just tell a student, talk to your school about it. So we're here to help. That's really, if you take away one thing from this presentation, come to our booth afterwards. We are here to help you. We have resources. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. We talk to teachers all the time, and we're working on, filling these needs and helping.
And by the way, teachers doesn't necessarily mean somebody who has a teaching certificate.
Yeah.
Everybody in this room can be a teacher. Constantly teaching and inspiring others around you.
And even beyond that, one of the resources that we have is ground instructor training. So if you are interested in teaching students and you're at that point in life where that makes sense, you can become an advanced ground instructor, basic ground instructor, and actually sign students off to take their knowledge tests. And that's really what schools are looking for. That's kind of, all right, what do I need to achieve? You need to get students to the level where they can take the knowledge test for private pilot. So these programs are going to benefit the whole aviation community. We all, want to see these students thrive. We want to see them be successful, and we want to help and maybe even bring them up into the air and see that first flight and how exciting it is. So, it's going to help flight schools. They're going to come to you for training. It's going to help these career pilot programs. And if you're in EAA or some other aviation organization, these are the students that you can mentor.
Yeah, so just a summary here, and then we'll wrap it up. We talked about the growing worldwide demand for pilots. Someday we're going to look back and we're going to talk about the good old days. Right now, this is the good old days of aviation, so enjoy it. And it looks like we're going to be able to ride this wave for quite some time. But this is the good old days of aviation. STEM programs introduce aviation early. I like to say, a candle loses nothing by lighting another. Be that flame that inspires somebody else. Train to the standards in your simulator, verify it in the airplane. There's an enormous cost savings by training in a simulator. You're going to create safer pilots, and community outreach opportunities are everywhere. Ultimately, you can become an FAA instructor if you want to go to that level, and then, as Callie said, you can actually sign people off. What that means is, for someone who wants to become a private pilot or get their instrument rating or a commercial pilot, there's a couple of different tests they need to take, but they need an authorized instructor to actually give them a sign-off to go take that test. As a ground instructor, you can do that. And did you know you can become a ground instructor without actually even being a pilot? You don't ever have to even ever step foot in an airplane, and you can become a ground instructor. And these are some of the programs that Gleim have to help you do that. We provide all the educational tools. We've been doing this for almost 40 years, training people to become pilots and instructors. So as Callie said, if you can stop by our booth, we're at booth 209, just down here at the end of the aisle. Look up our simulation products at gleimaviation.com/simulation, aviationteam@gleim.com. We got a couple minutes here. I think we're 2 or 3 minutes over, so I don't want to run over, but do you have any questions?
So the picture that you showed of the 5 or 6 simulators in the high school
Right.
classroom, those students who want to do that, they have not decided do I want to be a pilot or not. They're just doing it out of interest, out of fun.
Right.
What's the FAA regulation for them to take such a course? Do they already have to do, even though it's only ground to start with, do they already have to have the medical and that's, well, the medical is, do they have to, or can they just take it and then decide afterwards before they step into an airplane?
Repeat it.
This is what I want to do.
So the question was, for anybody who's watching the live stream, do the students who are learning this in school, what are the requirements? Do they have to have a medical certificate? What's the, really I think the question is, what does the FAA think about this? Right? Okay. So the FAA, really they absolutely love it because what they're finding is it is creating safer pilots. The FAA is strongly encouraging people to do this. So if you look at things like the Airman Certification Standards, which is the FAA document that describes what you need to do to become a pilot, there's 3 categories in that. There's what's called knowledge, there's risk management, and there are skills. The FAA wants you to be able to master all of those. When you go to take your knowledge test, the written exam, you got to be able to pass that with a 70%. When you go to take your flight test, there's nothing less than 100%. If you miss anything, it's a failure. You do it again. You learn, you do remedial training, you move on. With simulation, this is preparing pilots, this is making them safer. So the FAA strongly encourages the use of simulation as much as possible. One of the aviation safety inspectors from the Orlando district office is going to be here, I believe either later on today or tomorrow, doing a seminar. Bob Jex, he's doing a seminar that has to do partly with simulation. So they're on board, and some of their folks are going to be here talking about this tomorrow. So does that answer your question? You asked about medicals. No, you don't have to have a medical certificate to get started, because you're right. Not everybody who goes through maybe an aviation class in high school is going to move on into aviation. So,
And some have no idea what it is. I've visited a few classrooms at this point. Probably half of them are like, yeah, I want to do this, and they know exactly the path they're going to take. Half of them have no idea. And the teachers that I'm talking to are like, they have to get to the hook point. So, you know, some students sign up and then they're sleeping for the first half and then they hear something and they're like, wait, pilots do that? Okay, now I'm interested, now I'm paying attention. So it's really on the teachers to like get the interest going. And I saw one more question back there.
What's the relationship between your product and offerings with what AOPA is doing and rolling out STEM education into high schools?
Yeah.
Are they competitive or complementary, or is there a relationship?
it's complementary. So while we're not partnering with AOPA, so to speak. Oh, the question, by the way, was what is our relationship with AOPA? The Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association has a very strong STEM initiative, which we love the STEM initiative that AOPA is doing. It's creating so much awareness for this need in the community and across the country, really. But AOPA has a curriculum that they're working on. They have it for 9th and 10th grade right now. In the next couple years, it'll be out for 11th and 12th grade as well. That program still needs resources that the students use in the classroom. It has the backbone of the training, it's got the activities, but what it doesn't have is the actual knowledge material behind it. So a lot of that is built into the curriculum, but the resources that the students and the teachers are actually using, they still need that. The simulators, that hardware, they still need that. AOPA isn't providing that stuff. You still need to get all the hands-on material into the students.
Are some of the schools under that program using your material?
Yeah.
Yeah, are some of the schools using this? Yes, they are. So there are schools that are AOPA schools that are using Gleim's material. We've been working with high schools now for well over a dozen years, before STEM was really even a buzzword. So this isn't new to us. A lot of them just maybe had an aviation champion that wanted to introduce aviation to high school students.
Yeah.
Well, now that STEM is a thing, and AOPA it has their curriculum, this ties in very, very well with that.
And I think the other piece to that equation is now the funding is there. So, schools can get funding from their, Perkins funding or national funding or whatever.
Yeah.
So the support is there.
Right. We got to wrap this up because we got another seminar. I think we got a couple more minutes. Are there any other questions?
I do have one.
Yes.
The hard one. You've got a club or you've got a class, and you're starting in your school, and 50 people sign up. Probably because they want to play with simulators. They figure it's an easy thing they can do. How do you discriminate?
So the question was, you've got a new program, you're starting this aviation club, and you got 50 people that want to sign up. And the question was, how do you discriminate? I'm not going to use the word discriminate anymore, but how do you select who's going to be into your aviation program? So the way that you do that is actually you have to develop some type of a feeder. Some type of a feeder program. So you might actually, if you have that much demand for it, you might need to start earlier than high school. Have a middle school program where you start to introduce some of these concepts as early as possible. When you introduce the concepts to them, some of them are going to like it, some of them aren't going to like it, some of them are going to really embrace it and want to move on. So when you have a program for upper level students, have some type of an interview process. So you can interview the students who are coming into your program and ask them, why do you want to do this? Give them some type of a test. What do they know? Have some way to measure their knowledge that they should have learned in that lower level class or in the middle school class. From there, you're really going to tell who is really committed to this and who just wants to do it because this sounds like it's going to be a fun credit. Does that make sense?
It does. If you don't have the middle school option,
If you don't have
Ninth grade.
ninth grade,
That's
build
perfect.
it. So
Yeah.
is this a problem that you're having at your school?
don't know yet.
No, don't know yet. So I guess we'll find out. So again, you might have to develop some type of an interview process. Here's the thing: if you don't have something to build into, what are some of the other skills that this is teaching? This is teaching anything from customer service skills to engineering skills to aviation knowledge. Work with some of the other teachers at your school and find out what are some of the career-ready skills that you want to determine students have. Maybe you're not using aviation knowledge, maybe you're using some of these other career-ready skills to find out if somebody really has that motivation, that passion to be able to continue through.
Yeah.
So somebody else had asked about, I think we were talking about some other skills that this builds. Think about it like this. Right here in Central Florida, what is one of the things that Orlando, Florida is known for? Theme parks, right? So maintenance technicians, 754,000 maintenance technicians are needed. That's not just to work on airplanes. The amusement parks out here, when they need somebody to work on roller coasters, you know who they hire? Aircraft and power plant mechanics that work on airplanes. The systems are identical. The hydraulics, the electronics, the computers, the braking systems, the computer systems that work on amusement park rides are the same systems that work in airplanes. Same types of redundancies, same types of fail-safe systems. There are lots of industries with very similar situations to that. It's not just about aviation. This reaches so much farther than the skies. Any other questions? All right, we'll be at the booth, or you can reach us online, gleimaviation.com. Again, I'm Paul Duty, Callie Wilkes, and I appreciate you sticking around and hearing us out.
Yeah. Thank
Thank
you.
you.